Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi Achint. I have with me my friend Cleo Paskal, who's going to talk to us about what's happening in the world. There's just so much from India, Canada to China to America to the growing rift between the powers to wars to a whole lot of things. So let's have a chat with her and find out what she thinks about various issues around the world. Namaskar. Thank you so much for once again joining me. It's always an honor to have you on the platform.
A great pleasure, and of course, I have to begin by apologizing yet again. I think the last time we spoke, I was trying to discuss American behavior, and now as a Canadian, I have the pleasure of no, like stay the same size. Don't make me too big. I feel like sort of getting crawling into my shell here. It's
No,
yeah.
don't worry about it.
What can I say that hasn't already been better said by the Indian analysts who understand the situation better than I do anyway? So there you go.
Why is the biggest question a lot of people are asking. What do you think is the reason for all this drama, if I may?
Well, uh, I mean, it's clearly political. So I think there are probably multiple reasons. Um, if you go back to the very first statement in Parliament, that was, of course, immediately after the disastrous G20 meeting, right? The plane broke down, and I mean, if you trace it back to the first, I mean, actually, if you trace it back right to the beginning, uh, it was Canada not ever properly going after the Air India bombers and clearing that up. I mean, that's and then allowing that to fester inside the country and take root and combine with Chinese elements and Pakistani elements and tap into that long-standing element of Chinese influence within Canadian politics, which goes back to when Canada was one of the first Western countries to recognize China in 1970, and that's the father of this prime minister, right? So the Pierre Trudeau, the father of this prime minister, went to China in 49, and then he went again in 1960 as a labor lawyer. When he was prime minister in 1970, he um, opened up the country to China, and then in the 70s, there was the Canada-China Business Council was established, which included some very big players in Canadian business, including SNC-Lavalin, which Carolyn knows about, and Bombardier and Power Corp. Power Corp is uh, helped Chinese businesses, state-owned businesses, figure out how to invest in the West in the 1970s. It's hired former Canadian prime ministers over the years. These linkages are deep and old. They combined with all sorts of other elements, including the anti-Americanism of the early 70s, late 60s, and early 70s in Canada. The children of missionaries that were in China well over 100 years ago, and then came back and joined the Canadian Civil Service. So it's not it wasn't one thing. Canada was primed, um, and certain elements within the political structures were primed, and now he's got, as an individual, the prime minister has problems within his party at this as well, and the potential for an investigation into Chinese influence, political influence within the Canadian system. So if you say, oh, okay, you know what, the real problem is India, um, it distracts from some of the other issues, throws grit into the wheels, and at the same time, I mean, things are happening like saying that conservative members of the Conservative Party may be under foreign influence, but then not saying who. And if you're the leader of the Conservative Party, if you take the briefing about who, you're then legally not allowed to say what you learned, and it shuts down the rest of the conversation. So it's just, I mean, as a Canadian, I look at this and go, this whole thing is just a complete mess. And where is Canada's national security really benefiting from these things, or economically, or Canadian people? Are we more secure because of this? And it just it's hard to know. It seems like an easy question, but there's so many problems within the system that it's hard to know how to cut it. And I mean, I would even go back to, I mean, another thing. If you remember the truckers' protests in Canada, you know, and the invocation of the uh, Emergency Measures Act, and the way that the Canadian government behaved at the time with seizing of bank account, freezing of bank accounts, and really kind of draconian overreach like we haven't seen. You see the impulses of a government that was really shocking. So yes, I mean, it's sort of like the last time we talked, and it was like, we're never going to trust the American government again. And I'm like, well, the American people don't really trust the American government. And in the same way, it's sort of like India's going, you know, Canadian government's gone crazy. And I mean, as a Canadian, we saw that during the reaction to the truckers' protests, or at least I did. I mean, again, there's a lot of division within society, so other people feel differently. But I certainly felt that the response to the peaceful demonstrations of the truckers' protest was really shocking, and actually very almost Chinese in the way that there was this crackdown on it. So long, rambling, non-answer to what's going on, but just to say we're veering off the rails. And my deep concern is that at least one element of this is to try to sow distrust between the Five Eyes in India. And and I don't know who benefits from that. And even, you know, it's not like, you know, what what do you think about all of this and about the initial incident and all that sort of stuff?
For me, it's a little weird because here is a country I'm kind of looking at that it should be close to India. The Western Alliance should be close to India, ideally. But somewhere down the line, I really think that the Western Alliance has become more tactical in nature than strategic. They have stopped thinking about consequences to their actions because of the hubris of being a singularity, if I may. You know, it's really funny because what happens is that they take these steps and then they have to backtrack. You look at pretty much everything which is happening around us today. They keep telling Israel, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. When Israel does it, and then you realize, oh, the Americans or the Western alliance is helping them doing it. So why are you giving these public statements? Come out and stand for what you stand for, right? You can't be wishy-washy. Media statements are one part, the reality is totally different, and the diplomacy is totally different. There are back-end deals which are happening, which are shady, no less. I really don't think they have a plan. Why would you want to antagonize a country like India, which is not doing anything to you? All we are saying is there are people who are speaking anti-India and who are making statements that are anti-India. Make sure that doesn't happen. It's not too much to ask for. Tomorrow, if we start, gather 100,000 people, which is not that difficult in India, and start calling up for the breakup of Canada, how will Canada feel? Now, India is sensitive enough not to do this kind of stuff, but that's not the time is not far when this thing will happen. When
Mhm,
the government will not do this, the civil society will stand up and say, "Listen, hello, what's wrong with you people?"
mhm,
And that's actually happening. The way that the ridicule of the leadership of the West, which is taking place in India, it's not funny. I mean, even I do it, but when you think about it, when you kind of analyze it as to why am I personally doing something like that, you realize that that is the reality at the end of it. What do you do to such incompetent people that can't think straight on their own 2 feet?
mm,
Uh, you've antagonized Russia, which you should keep to yourself, right? In the battle with China, you've antagonized India, which you should keep to yourself. You want everybody to say yes, sir, and stand behind you, like Japan or Australia or anything like that, who are also now kind of looking around and saying, listen, this is not working out. They're not saying it openly, but you can see they take that one little step somewhere which is anti West, and they get wrapped for it after that. But then they take those steps. It's weird, it's the world is changing, and the sooner the Western establishment realizes that the world is changing, the better it will be, and they will be a part of the new world rather than an antagonist. They are trying to make themselves into the China of the future, which somehow I don't understand why. Is it that it's just extreme hubris? Is it that it's extreme, I mean, incompetence, if I may? Because I'm sorry to say this, but in Canada, I see gross incompetence. I mean, it's been 1 year that people have been saying, okay, fair enough, India did this, give some evidence. In the hearings, in under oath, the national security advisor, the of the that time, the current one, and the prime minister come out and say, oh, we've got credible intelligence. You don't spoil relations between two countries because of intelligence. It just doesn't work. And finally, I want your thoughts on this, that personal egos of certain leaders are actually kind of hindering the process of, uh, I don't know, the reset. Reset is a very tainted word because of the World Economic Forum and all that, but the world will change. But personal ambitions of certain leaders are not letting that happen in the way it should, peacefully. You know, everybody should be given their parts and stuff, but it's not. What do you think is the main reason that when there is a strategic understanding between countries, the Canadian Indo-Pacific policy is India, 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 India. I mean, like there is so many mentions of India. The American strategic policy of the Indo-Pacific is again India, 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 India. Why would you antagonize a country like that then?
Yes, your point about there being multiple different messages is helpful in this context. I think that there are a lot of different things going on. I'm not uh, you know I, I think that there's almost a political survival mode affiliated to the behavior. I mean, of Prime Minister Trudeau. I mean, that's what it seems like. That's that first response on the floor of Parliament was after that disastrous trip, but I don't think it was only because of that disastrous trip. But the disastrous trip caused a political hit, and there have been a lot of problems within his caucus now. Um, Talk about replacing him, and it's flaring up again. So there part of it is possibly desperation, but it also serves a much it's larger function of just this really um, concerning fragmenting that you're talking about, strategic fragmenting between countries that should be natural allies. I mean, I don't. There's so much going. Like, I don't understand the Diego Garcia thing. I don't understand um, f- La, Lamy going to China. I don't. The Australians are seem to be prioritizing reestablishing normalization of trade with China. In which case, then do you really want them involved in the Pacific Islands policing? Because they're certainly not going to be incentivized to help to go after Chinese corruption in the Pacific Islands if they think that it might then affect their trade with China and that's their priority. The same thing with the UK and in different areas, and the same thing, frankly, in Canada in different areas. If you can say what you want about India, but if your political ties or economic ties are strongly with Beijing, then um, the response is going to be different. I've thought, at least for the last 10 years, that if you want to understand how deeply somebody understands the insidious and nefarious nature of the Chinese Communist Party, and what it actually intends to do, then you look at what they think about India. Because if you truly understand one, then you truly understand the value of the other. Not just, I mean, India, not as a military counterbalance to China, but as what the Chinese Communist Party says is not possible. So the Chinese Communist Party says you need an authoritarian regime to run a country of a billion people and to have, economic, and India's right next door, and shows that in fact India's growth is different but better and more sustainable. They say that you need to, throw 1 million people in concentration camps in order to have domestic peace. Well, India is a pluralistic society right next door, totally different approach. And, so, if India is everything that the Chinese Communist Party says shouldn't exist, and as such is a kind of existential threat to China, to specifically the Chinese Communist Party. And and so if you truly understand the problem with the Chinese Communist Party, you appreciate what India is. And India, and I think that's much more clear to, I mean, that's why India's chairmanship of the G20 was such a success, because there are a lot of countries around the world that aren't West and aren't China, and they're looking for that other option, and India shows it. So, if you're attacking that, if you're trying to limit that, if you're trying to weaken that, what India is, what India can be, not just as as a country, but as a example, then something's really wrong. Like you're on the definitely on the wrong side of history. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, um, no country is perfect, and India's on a journey, and there are going to be ups and downs, but compared to you know what else is on offer. So, and the other thing is that, thinking about it from India's point of view as much as possible, when not being Indian, yeah, you had yeah the way the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, what's going on in Bangladesh, what's going on, with this. There was a piece in one of the Chinese papers recently about why India isn't a good place to move iPhones manufacturing, and they put down, I think, like 5 points, and that the China those that 5 points is a 5 point attack list for the Chinese Communist Party on India. Those are the points that they'll go after. So with all of that, what has India been trying to do? India's been trying to create stability in Sri Lanka. It's been trying to create stability in the Maldives. It's been trying, it it hasn't created this sort of disruption, that we've seen from other large countries. And this, I don't know what happened in Canada, but I mean, look, we can talk about the U.S. rendition program if you like. I mean, so, and the question is, if we're not, if the people who care about, or say they care about, democracy, transparency, accountability, especially rule of law, aren't working together, and if Canada isn't doing what it should be required to do by the international community in terms of ensuring that terrorism isn't fostered and sponsored on its territory, then you know, I don't know what I would do. But how many people died in India during the Khalistani terrorism era?
I think about seven. The terrorism era. I thought you were
Yeah,
talking about
no,
that
no,
that
yeah,
protest. Oh, hundreds and thousands of people. That's the
Yeah.
whole thing. The see the whole for me, it's not about the Khalistani thing. Let me be very clear. This Khalistani thing is just a facade.
Mhm.
The real thing is, I don't know if Canadians actually realize that your country has been captured. The country of Canada has been captured by thugs, gangsters, drug dealers, murderers, and the politicians just in the yearn of power. And that's where I find the biggest flaw in democracy. And sometimes you really think that, yeah, okay, if the Chinese system is really better or not, because at least this sort of nonsense doesn't happen. But it does happen inside China as well. We just don't get to know about it. Having said that, the way that, and I'm going to take Minister Jayashankar's words on this, that you are importing the worst of the worst people. And the problem is that it is being imported for political purposes. And politicians are actually allowing that to happen, supporting that, and as a matter of fact, enabling that to happen. Now, what that does is when politicians are going to enable something like that to happen, they will not improve. They will. I'll give you an example. Prime Minister Trudeau talked about Lawrence Bishnoi and all that stuff. India has given requests for 14 of his gang members to be extradited to be put on trial. So, firstly, there is no acceptance of that. There is no extradition that happens. And then you blame India, saying that these are the same people committing crimes in Canada. They are Indian citizens, so you figure it out. The point that I'm trying to get at is people are laughing, and that's something which is weird to me. That has the Western establishment gone so oblivious to the global reaction? And trust me, the global South is watching this.
Yeah, I think so. I think
It
that
is.
I think yeah, and but it may be worth you know it's not a uniform establishment. And so there's I think there certainly is this is not a popular prime minister in Canada at the moment, right? I mean, that's one thing. The other is, there are people who are very much saying something different. We have an issue with the media in Canada. Um, we have it. I'm not. It would be nice to see more investigative journalism. There's some that do a very good job now on the Chinese stuff, especially the bureau. Sam Cooper's the bureau does a good job, but there's there is not a lot of information about India generally. And if you run through we talked about this last time, the university systems, there's the university systems tend not to be very modern India friendly, in the same way that they're not friendly towards Israel or other groups. And who knows whether part of that goes back to funding and the same sort of groups that are affecting some of the political decision making, or whether it's organic. I don't, that could be part of both. Um, but it's way more about Canada and the discussions going on in Canada than the majority of Canadians. I mean, and certainly more context. I mean, what you just mentioned about that, it's not really getting reported much. So I don't know. I don't know what to say, and uh, I don't know where this goes. So this thing is, I think, we know what the problem is. We've had enough, of admiring the problem. We know what the problem is. I think the question is, what do we do about it? How do we, what is a desired way station or end state, and how do we get there? That to me is kind of the more important, or an important part of the discussion. uh it is, what do we do? We've got this problem. What do we do about it?
I don't think there is a plan. That's what I'm saying. India is saying, okay, fair enough. You want to go antagonistic, let's go antagonistic. That's not a problem. See, this is the issue. The perception of India is still, oh, it's the 70s, 80s, 90s poor country, and this and that and the other, which is not the case. We are well integrated into the global supply chains. We have leverages.
I kind of suspect that at least part of it is, um, that there's certain elements, and I mean, it's not hidden. There's certain elements within various Western political groupings that don't like an assertive, independent India, right? So I mean, I think it's partially is that, and Prime Minister Modi has been, and Minister Jaishankar. I mean, India is moving in ways, like you said, sort of, internationally, and in terms of alliance, and creating new constellations like I2U2 and the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, and things that are innovative and potential solutions. But when you have a solution, the people who've been benefiting from the existing dynamics lose unless they're kind of brought into the new solution somehow. So the question is, what does, who's threatened? And again, we can kind of guess, who's threatened by successful growing India. We've talked about that already. Um, and then we get back to the same thing. Okay, what do we do about it? How do we counter this? And the Canadian government, or sections of the Canadian government, acting in the way that they're acting, um, is is trying. The you can't help but think that the goal is to create a fracture with India. And I've heard it from, it's just today, from somebody from another country, a non-Western country, um, questioning, you know, India's credibility, or Prime Minister Modi's credibility, right? So if you're not engaged with India regularly, and you hear all of this noise coming out of the left, or I mean, not talking politically, I'm just talking, kind of this noise coming out of here, then and you don't take the time to fully look at it, and it is very difficult to fully look at anyway, especially if you're looking at the Western media, then you might think that's real. And then that result of the isolation of India, and the fragmentation and a fracturing of what should be friendships. I mean, obviously not alliances, but partnerships and friendships happens. But at the same time, as you know better than anybody, I mean, DoD is still working very closely with India. So I don't know whether the goal for those actors is to create so much noise that it even affects those strong relationships that are happening quietly. I hope not, but I think it's very possible that that's one of the goals. Frighten away some of the people who don't really know that much about it, and start to eat away at, you know. I mean, you saw the news reports about what looks like leaks on the U.S. side of the Israeli attack plans on Iran, right? I mean, that's something has really gone wrong in parts of the US system. If that's, I mean, you gotta hope the Israelis didn't tell the Americans what they were up to, if that's the situation. So I hope this doesn't sound like I'm rambling, but it is incredibly um, uh, difficult to have to deal with this when
Can I rephrase what you
yeah,
just said? And that's
yeah,
very
please.
interesting to me. You kind of hinted at something very interesting: the silos within the U.S. system of the state versus the defense, and we
Mhm.
see that. There's no question about it. But the Defense Department is going to lose out. There's no question. I mean, there's a deal for the engines between India. They've been delayed for a year now, right? And that our fighter program was basically dependent on those engines. Now, what's going to happen is India has gone ahead and signed deals with Afghan. India has gone ahead and signed deals with the Russians. We're going to have more options. That's not a problem. But the factor is that in the long term, a growing country with heavy defense needs is going to just walk away from you. And the point is, when I say you, it's not you in person. I know you don't have those intentions. It's the West. Uh, um,
Or again, it's certain elements within
l-
that are
let me make it
yeah.
let me make it clear that
Mm.
India is never going to buy a fighter aircraft from America. It's not going to happen. It isn't going to happen ever. Even if they're the last country on earth making fighter aircraft, we'll fly a bicycle. That's the that's the feeling within the Indian defense establishment that they are untrustworthy.
Mhm.
And here is the country. The point that I'm saying is fair enough. You're not wanting India to kind of assert itself and this and that. Talk to them. Come to a deal. Come to a point. Sit down over the table. Here you are trying to damage the sovereignty, the integrity, the social balance within a country, uh, just to teach it a lesson. And does anybody really believe the factor that anybody who are human beings today, in today's day and age, will accept that? I don't think so. I think that is highly misguided. I think misguided is a very light word. It's it's stupid, if I may say something like that, because if see, we had an issue with Maldives. I'll give you, just allow me 30 seconds. We had an issue with
Please.
Maldives. The social society bloody rose up in anger, and people let them have it. I mean, you can imagine the size of a country of India breaks down on the civil society I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the government. The government was very mellow and calm and didn't say anything.
I
As a matter of fact,
remember there was the no tourism to Maldives and whatnot
yeah,
and all
and
that
that
stuff.
was
Yeah.
what the country did, the people did.
Yeah.
Today, Canada is on the receiving end of that. If you open the Indian social media, you'll be like, whoa, whoa, wait, 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 wait. This is terrible. The way people are out with knives today and exposing stuff. See, everybody has hidden skeletons. People will expose it. Everything is on the internet. It's not that difficult to find.
Mhm.
You can do some Google searches. If not, there are various different means to find stuff, because most of the information that we are getting is coming from within Canada. That you
Yeah.
know what, this guy is like this. Put it up, put it up. So that's also there. His dirty past with a whole lot of things which are there. These are not things that Indians have investigated. These are things that Canadians themselves have investigated.
Mhm.
The dirty past of the Americans in terms of their CIA and their regime change operations and stuff like that. By the way, the IRI, the International Republican Institute, has put out a paper on Bangladesh that this is what we did there. It's there on the internet. I mean, and you're like, okay. And
Mhm.
then you say we were not involved. Really? You mobilized LGBTQ troops. They called shock troops in that report. It's a written report. I'll
Mhm.
send it to you. Have a read, and you'll be like, have these guys gone nuts? So the point is that the brazenness by which these institutions, the structure of the world is being used to antagonize someone. I think the lines are drawn now, and India's still taken a very softer stance with Canada. This is the first time India has come out and accused a prime minister in person. The first time. We've never done it. We
Mhm.
didn't do it to China. We didn't do it to Pakistan. So one can only imagine the level of condensation which is there within the MEA. And Indians are not, outspoken people.
Mhm.
Okay, fine. Just, we're very happy with our own lives. We are very happy within our country. We have 50 problems, but we are still very happy with it. That's okay. We'll figure it out. We've got time.
Yeah, but
There's a good old saying, you have the
I
watch,
understand.
we have the time, so don't
Yeah,
worry about it. We'll figure it
yeah,
out.
but I mean, I understand just MEA's position because it was putting the lives um of 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 Indian diplomats at risk. I
Yeah.
mean, this so I mean, I certainly it's just um it's just hard to watch. That's all. It's just I mean, it's all I it's we have yeah, we should have been talking for the last 35 minutes of about a whole bunch of other things. And and they got us. They managed to drag us into this and make us have to deal with this when there are these huge potentially existential threat or at least global changing effects that where where Indian people and Canadian people and will suffer substantially if they're not dealt with. So, whoever's pulled off this political warfare influence operation, kudos to them because, they got us. And now, how can we pull ourselves out of this spiral and get back to, going I mean, we have some of the same enemies and some are different. Um, but we should at least be able to combine our forces get the ones that are you know, that I'm I'm concerned that that recent article in the Chinese press about Indian production that concerned me because it was all things like labor problems and infrastructure problems, things like that. So you you basically anybody who's now wanting to hit India has been given the template for what to hit India on, and the Chinese operatives or Chinese sympathetic operatives in the country now know what to go after, like that iPhone parts manufacturing plant issue in Bengaluru from whatever it was a couple years ago, a few years ago. So, I don't, I don't, I don't want to see that happen, and I'd prefer we'd figure out a way of pushing back against that. But instead, we have to talk about the Canadian Prime Minister. It's just, I
This is irreparable. People don't understand the kind of damage that is done between India and the West. This is not going to get repaired so soon. Even if Donald Trump comes and he comes down to India and says, "Oh, all is forgotten. We'll throw out everything. Don't worry about it." Nobody's still going to trust. And see, the point that I'm trying to make is that it's not just India that you've antagonized. India's got a position in the world today, right? The West doesn't realize the factor that the global South is watching India. And one of the biggest things, I mean, I'll ask you this. When Minister Jaishankar started pushing back on the Russian oil narrative,
Mhm.
and he said that famous dialogue, Europe must understand that its problems are not the world's problems. And Europe also believes that the world's problems are not Europe's problems. You see that spiral down of uh, the respect of Western diplomats, Western media in the global South, especially in continents like Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, how Western media has been treated there, how Western diplomats have been treated there. People have been, I mean, openly now telling BBC, get lost, do what you want to. The credibility of the media is gone. Washington Post prints an article half an hour before just Justinder Singh Trudeau Lee comes out and gives a statement, and half an hour before. So obviously it was planned.
Yeah, so I
So
think that I think that actually, especially the people who want to see the fragmentation do understand India's position, and it concerns them, and so that's that's part of all of this. It's not just a Western audience; it's an international audience, and if they can make those same countries in Africa that you're talking about also like Canada less, then it's an added win. So, again, I'm very disconcerted by all of this, and it's what you said kind of initially, which is, okay, if you got the proof, lay the charges. Like, enough of this. Just, start, show it. And if you're willing to blow up one of the most important relationships of the 21st century with a fellow democracy, then put your cards on the table. Or do it the way that it's been done forever, which is discreetly and in private, and sort things out, diplomatically. But doing it politically, because this is all very much political, then that's you're not trying to solve the problem. Doing it this way is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to create more problems that are more severe and that cascade out. So, until this thing, starts to, and the other thing that I'm very concerned about is something that we've seen in the US, which is the politicization of the Canadian Intelligence Service. Yeah, I don't understand what's going on, and I very much hope that the intelligence service and intelligence isn't being politicized. I don't know. But we've seen similar elements of it happen elsewhere. It's really bad. It's again, however bad you know, it, it's not helpful for India. But India is, as you've said, very big country. It's got other options. It would be helpful if we could all work together, but if we can't, India's survived millennia. It'll continue. But it's uh, this is these are, to me, indications of some very, very serious problems. Uh, I within elements of the Canadian political system. Um,
I'd not restrict it to the Canadians itself because it's not just, I
yeah,
feel sorry for Canada, honestly. And people in India might hate me for this, but I feel sorry for Canada. It's a beautiful country, good people. At one time, I wanted to move there. By the way, I'm going to say it out loud. But something changed, and I said, "Nah, I'm happy here." But then it's not Canada that's doing this.
well, that's the point.
It's the global left. It's the globalists of the world
So I'm not sure. So the way I judge by outcome,
you
and
let me
yeah,
let me substantiate my point.
yeah,
So
please.
Justin Trudeau comes out with this. The Americans suddenly come out with the Pannu charge. Oh, India is trying to assassinate someone and this and that, holier than thou image and stuff. There are a list of 59 leaders that the CIA itself acknowledges that they've taken out. In 1975, I think it was the Direction 11506 signed by the then president saying that CIA needs to stop assassinations. It was the outcome of the church committee. See, that's the whole thing. People, they just because the people in their countries don't read doesn't mean we don't.
Hmm.
And I don't have any notes or anything like that. I'm rattling to you out of what I have in my mind.
Hmm.
Gerald Ford signed this on the 20th of February 1976. Directive 11506 saying stop assassinations. And then the coup in Iran happened, and they're like, shit, we didn't think about this. Then Afghanistan went to a toss. Shit, we didn't think about this. And then they said, no, the CIA needs to get back. And then Ronald Reagan signed a deal to create the National Endowment of Democracy in 1985, which is basically a front of the CIA, where today, by the way, Victoria Nuland has been brought back on the board, the queen of regime changes in the world. And that's not me saying. That's, again, the US media telling us this. So, see, the point is that the bereft of understanding the rest of the world, understands what's happening, sees what's happening, reads what's happening, And the factor that, oh, it's come from America, so it has to be the truth. So the way that the American establishment is kind of backing Trudeau right now, oh, we expect India to cooperate with Canada. You really expect India to cooperate with Canada? Really? Australia was the only Five Eyes country who said, you know, uh, when all this was happening, Australians were in India doing a 2+2 meeting. They're like, no, we don't want to get into this. We don't want to get into this, because the last time they did, they got wrapped really bad. No, but just the sheer factor of the hubris of the location of the Canadians have been after us for doing the FTA. We said, okay, one of the biggest things of the FTA is safety and security of our citizens. Please make sure that thing goes across. They're not wanting to do that. We said the same thing to the Brits. They're not wanting to do that. So there's no FTA.
Mhm.
Now, who's at a loss here? Not India. The market of Canada is what? It's tiny. And at the end of it, the Indians staying in Canada are going to import Indian goods. That's going to happen. The Indians staying in Britain will import Indian goods. So we're not going to lose. Who's losing is the production and the manufacturing sector of Britain and Canada at the end of
Mhm.
it. Now, see, that's the long term. That's why I'm saying that there's a lack of strategic thought within the West, that they've kind of forgotten how to think forward. Now, coming to China, when you look at this, the Chinese are very happy when something like this happens. And you're a China watcher, they'll be like thrilled. Have you seen the statements coming out of China about this?
Yeah,
We stand behind
and
India's
that
right, this,
yeah.
that, we stand behind India's right. This is in spite of the factor that amongst all this, we opened another consulate office of Taiwan in Mumbai. So they cribbed and cried for a day. After that, they came back to the factor, we stand behind this thing. We need to work together with India with BRICS and this and that and all that
Mhm.
stuff. So it's a very confusing sort of a state.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack. And again, for me, for this, all I can look at is what are the seeming intended outcomes and actual outcomes. And I mean, as you've said, I mean, China's delighted, um, and uh, and you know, I don't know what's going to happen with Canada. I don't know whether Canada will end up more isolated. And again, if you're China, you want to cut Canada off from the Indian market anyway. You want to make it. You don't want you want the trade flows to be heading towards China as opposed to towards India. The U.S. stuff, I really, I don't get it. I don't know obviously as much as you do, but I mean, or I need to look at it more. Um, but you know, I we they did do the extraordinary rendition stuff is definitely on the record, and to me, this is the if President Obama, as we know, you know, killed an American citizen um, in a drone strike. We need, it would be very helpful to get back to rule of law and all around, and to get back to the very beginning of this whole discussion. Canada needs to go after the terrorists who are in Canada and should have done this decades ago. And if Canada had followed rule of law principles from the beginning, we wouldn't be in this position now. Um, and and as a Canadian, all I can do is take responsibility or acknowledge my own country's actions. Well, I can acknowledge, I can, say that
It's very sweet
that's
of you. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm really
please,
sorry.
please,
That's very
yeah.
sweet of you. You apologize right at the beginning, and but we don't have anything against anybody.
Yeah, but it needs to be said, it
It
needs to
does.
be
Fair
said
enough.
that, uh,
And the
it
funny
it
thing is, They
Yep.
say Nijar, 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 Nijar. The national security advisor at that time says, "Oh, it was a retaliation for the murder of Ripu Daman Singh, that the Air India bomber and all that stuff. It was a retaliation for that." But the South Asian community felt differently. Hang on. The South Asian community felt differently. Who are the South Asian community? India doesn't call itself South Asian. The only country that calls itself South Asian is Pakistan. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So there's a saying in India that Canada has now become Vadda Pakistan. You know what is Vadda? Vadda is big.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
so that's the
Uh,
joke.
yeah, and I mean, because India lived through this.
Yeah.
The most immediate victims of that sort of terrorism are people within their own communities. So if you truly did care about your Indo-Canadian communities or whatever, you would get rid of the terrorists. you know, you'd but regardless, it's your responsibility as a government to go after the bad people in your country. I mean, that's your job. And obviously it benefits your own citizens, but it also makes you a better and more trustworthy, and this is the word that you've used a few times, which is a very important word, trusted partner. I mean, we will end up working together in a whole bunch of different ways, um, regardless of trust, just because you can verify along the way. But the the it's just also uh, it's just so unnecessary. It's like when you uh, I wouldn't be presumptuous enough to say it's like a family, but India says the world is one family, right? So, what and this part of the family should be getting along a lot better. And the people do, but the heads of these particular nodes in the family. I mean, I feel I the mental part of me, the strategist part of me thinks that there's something really wrong and dangerous, and I don't like it because it's um, setting things back substantially at a time when we have very little time. So I really don't like it, and the human part of me, doesn't the emotional part doesn't like that a lot of people who should be being protected aren't being protected, and badness, evil is allowed to just run around um, and corrupt and hurt innocent people. So there's nothing. I don't like this situation at all,
Yeah.
and um, and I'd like to figure out a way to get through it.
And China's going to have some fun about it, but that's how it is.
China and Pakistan and
Oh,
Iran
Pakistan is
and
a non-entity. Trust me, they're done.
yeah. So you
They're
you
done.
talked about Canada, I think so we had there was an inquiry into money laundering in Vancouver, and one of the former law enforcement officials was testifying that over a decade ago, they saw the Chinese, the Sinaloa cartel, and the Iranians working together in the port of Vancouver. I mean,
Yeah.
our problems are very serious in
There
Canada.
is a Pakistani retired military officers club in Toronto.
Mhm.
Nothing wrong in
Yeah.
that on the face of it, but guess what they do there? So
Well, I'd have to guess because we're not doing investigations into it. I mean,
and that's the whole thing, that's the whole
or
thing. The Chinese are looking at this and saying, is this the Western alliance?
yeah, but you can't. So we have to sort of. That's it. It's not. It's helpful to see instead of this is one strand in one country. So let's see. Are there other strands that are more helpful? Or what that can be built on. Are there other things that are more? And traditionally, it's been people to people or economic or members of the defense community or strategic community or whatever. Because I can tell you, there are people who within the Canadian defense and security community who are also extremely concerned about all of this. And they're much more frontline than I am. It's their job to worry about threats to Canada and to the world, and they certainly know what's going on. So there are uh, all sorts of people who don't like this and want to figure out a way through it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And
I'm
yeah,
sure. I'm sure. Lastly, I'd like to ask you about China and its kind of motives around the place. We see that the North Korean border suddenly started to heat up, and that's very weird to me. Seems like the US is being extended into another front. Uh, but again, I'm going to be antagonistic and say, the State Department needs to get its head out of its backside to kind of look at the world around. That it's in trouble. It's in deep, deep trouble. And thank God we have people like Modi who said, nah, we're not getting into this. We're not getting into this. This is not our war. This is not our fight. We're not getting into this. You guys
mhm.
can do what you want to. Get me my popcorn because I'm going to sit here and watch what happens. Uh, how do you see the whole Chinese situation here? Uh, Israelis are now going to kind of dominate the situation with in the Middle East because of these leaked papers and the yesterday attack on Netanyahu's house and stuff like that. Israelis are going to dominate this thing. Americans will not be able to say much. I mean, what are you going to tell Netanyahu? Forget the attack on your house that tried to kill you and your wife? You're not going to be able to say that. So you're out from there. How do you think now China is going to play the game in this region? Because is there another front coming across in the Indo-Pacific in terms of, let's say, a North Korea or a issue with the Philippines, or if nothing else, the way they surrounded Taiwan once again?
I mean, they they're they have a lot of options,
Yeah.
including well beyond the kinetic.
Hmm.
They're the cyber capabilities are enormous. The economic damage that they can do is pretty high. There's they have so many cards to play, that it's more a question of them thinking whether something's going to benefit them. The Chinese Communist Party y- tends to do something if they think it's going to work. I mean, Galwan was a rare example where it didn't. But then they readjusted and attacked the Mumbai grid and did a bunch of other things. So the you know the the U.S. is we'll see what happens with the election, or we'll see. I don't know what their calculation is for the effect on the US election of an attack before the election. And I don't know what their calculation is for, depending on who wins the election, what the response would be. I'm I'm sure they've gamed it 6 ways to Sunday, but I think that their trajectory is very clear, and depending on what they think, um, they could, uh, I don't what they think their desired outcome for the election would be and how an action before the election would affect that outcome. I Those are factors that I don't know. Um, uh, the U.S. is not in response mode at the moment. I mean, you can ask the Filipinos about it. Um, So I don't know whether if the calculation is, for example, that if there was an attack before the election, that would give the Biden-Harris administration to look stronger, the opening to look stronger, and that would help them in the election. And then that's a desired outcome for Beijing. Or if they might think that they wouldn't respond, and then that would, help Trump, and that would be. I just don't know what they think would be best for them. But they're in a position where those are their constraints, not whether they can do it or not, just whether it's the right time and the right thing for them to do.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's a very good answer, I must say, because it's it's a crazy time. A
I,
last
I, have a,
minute.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, please.
What do you think about
Shoot.
the Diego Garcia thing?
This had to happen. The Brits need to kind of pull back. There's no way. I mean, the problem is that the whole decolonization, if I may use the word,
Mhm.
as it's going, is going to impact stuff. Because, see, again, if you keep India on your sides, we would have shut up and we would have kept quiet, right? India is the one that has been pushing for this thing, and the major negotiations were done by India for both of them. So,
What do you mean
you
for
know,
both of them? For
oh, you read the Foreign Office of England and the Foreign Ministry of Mauritius statement.
I see. Okay.
We thank India for actually helping out in the negotiations between both the countries.
Right, right.
We were lobbying for it. There's no question about it. So we will do that. I mean, it's in our backyard at the end of it. Now, yeah, the Americans are going to sit here till 21:35 and stuff, but that's a big jolt. There's going to be a little fear that, oops, okay, there is a deal, fair enough. But now, see, Diego Garcia it's a legacy issue, and it's going to impact the Brits in a very nasty way in the Falklands or the Marianas, as you'd like to call it, Argentina.
Mhm.
It's going to hit them because they've already started up saying, okay, if you can leave those, you leave these also.
Mhm.
And that's going to happen. It's going to happen. And that's where I say that the Western Alliance needs to really figure out what their priorities are. What do they need to do? Who do they need to sit with? How do they safeguard themselves? I know they're trying to safeguard themselves by antagonize this, antagonize that. It's a very selfish way of doing stuff, which is fair enough. I can understand that. But a little strategic thought needs to be put into how to actually do it better. Right? India is a growing power in the region. You can't antagonize such a big power. You can't do it. And we just started to grow right now. In the next 5 years, it's going to be even more difficult to kind of push back.
Mhm.
Now, Mauritius is a very, very important strategic partner. By the way, Mauritius is the first country in the world that we have given an aid amount in Indian rupees.
Mhm.
So the dollar's out, the Brits are out. Whose fault is that?
Mhm.
So, that's what I'm saying. There's a lack of strategic thought in terms of how to take relationships forward. It cannot be that I'm saying it, so you please listen. It's not going to work.
Mhm.
It's not going to work. And this is our neighborhood in the end of it. You see Bangladesh. Bangladesh is going to go into chaos, absolute chaos. How much help can America come and give here? Another, what, today is another 10 days for the election? 10, 15 days for the election? And if that goes up in a toss, which is what 90% of the world thinks, that there's going to be a clash between two sides, may result in a lot of chaos. You think the Americans are going to look at, oh, Bangladesh needs our help? Sorry, not going to happen.
Mhm.
And this thing will sink. And when it'll sink, it'll come crawling back, like the same way Maldives did. I don't trust the Maldivians even now, but they will come crawling back. The biggest lesson in geopolitics, and you will agree with me on this, I know you're a very pragmatic, smart person, is geography. I always say this: read the book by Robert Kaplan, The Revenge of Geography. Read it. It's a beautiful book. It teaches us about how geography can actually make or break countries.
Mhm.
We have the geographical advantage in this region, so we are going to dictate, or we are working towards that point where our interests will be kept carefully within the partners within this region. We are not going to allow people to kind of antagonize us. At the moment, we can't do much because we're not that strong. But as time goes by, it's going to be the case. There's just no question about it. And so Diogo Garcia is just a part of it. It's just one step in it. You can get into the nitty gritties of it. Oh, it was an agreement. It was this. The American bases. It's better for this. We've never said that the Americans need to get thrown out from here. We've never said that. We've just said that the rightful owners of the place are the Mauritians. Please give it back to them. After that, you keep sitting there. We have no issues. You've done a deal with them. They're a free country. Figure it out. That's not an issue at all. Tomorrow, if Bangladesh gives out the Saint Martin Island to America, fair enough. They're an independent nation. We're not going to come around and say, "Oh, why do you do this, that?" Pakistanis have American bases today in Balochistan. Nobody will accept it. We know they're there. There's enough and more intelligence to state the fact that they're there. It's going to happen. The way the Baloch movement is being backed by the CIA today, it's not even funny. We can see it. The Pakistanis can't because they're sitting in American labs. And America is cutting it short. But we can see it. And we've been predicting this. I've been saying this on my channel for 2 years. Balochistan is next. Very strategic locations, got a port. It's got a connect to Afghanistan. It's got to connect to Iran. You can access the Central Asia. America does not have a standing in the Arabian Sea. Diego Garcia is a bit south. Then you've got Djibouti. You've got the Chinese also sitting there, and there's a lot of issues with regards to Houthis and everything like that. And if things go bad with Iran, Americans will need something in this area. So there you go. So yeah, there's a lot in terms of geopolitics which is going to open out. But I really wonder where they should start watching podcasts. Trust me, they'll learn a lot more. On a lighter note. But Cleo, thank you so much. You've always been very truthful, very to the point, very precise. It's always fun talking to you, and it's a learning experience. And trust me, you're one of the few Western people that I like talking to in terms of strategic this thing, because you've got that angle of let me absorb the other side and then make a judgment as to what needs to be done. And that's a very strategic way of thinking. I really, really appreciate that. And that's why I said you should come more often to the platform. And, because people really appreciate the line of thought. It's not because it's pro-India or anti-India or anything like that. It's realism.
Yeah, I try. I'm not sure what country I'm going to have to apologize for next. So next time we come on.
No, very sweet of you to do that. Okay. I mean, I must say that very kind of you to do that.
It's just true. It really is. I mean, from my perspective, it's just what it is.
Yeah,
but thank you. That's very kind. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. You. Lovely. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you.
And take care. Don't fall into trouble in Canada, yeah?
I'll try not to.